Welcome to the Future of Marriage debate. Is it the beginning of the end of marriage? Is it the end of the beginning? We are here to discuss that with Peter Tatchell of the Peter Tatchell Foundation and Reverend David Robertson, Free Church Minister and Director of the Solar Centre for Public Christianity. We're not going to cover the whole debate. We're not going to cover every jot and tittle of the law, but hopefully we will be able to go into more depth than some of the debates that we've seen this year. Especially warm welcome to anyone who's tuning into Revelation TV for the first time. This first hour will be a studio discussion and dialogue and debate. In the second hour, we're inviting you to engage on Facebook, Twitter, hashtag Future of Marriage, I think that's how you put it, and also by text. And we will also open the phone lines in the second hour, so you are very welcome. And just to mention, if you're watching a repeat of this programme, then please continue to engage online. Now, it's not an Oxford Union debate, so we're not going to formally give so much time for one side and then the other, but I'll try to be as fair as possible, and you can slam me in the second hour if I am not. But I'm going to ask Peter if you can open up and, from your perspective, talk about same-sex marriage and what effect you think it will have on marriage.
Well, I guess my starting point is that, for me, this issue is all about love. In all my human rights work, on all different issues, it's motivated by love. I love other people. I don't like to see people suffer discrimination or any kind of suffering. I love people, I love justice, I love equality, I love freedom. And for me, same-sex marriage is all about love. It's about two people who love each other deeply and profoundly and who want to get married. It just so happens that they are of the same gender. And to me, love is love. You know, I have gay and lesbian friends who've been together for 30, 40, and in one case, just over 50 years. Their love is just as sincere, just as profound, just as committed as that between any heterosexual man and woman. And I think their love deserves validation. It deserves appreciation. It deserves acknowledgement. It deserves rights and responsibilities that go with marriage. Having said that, of course, many people say that same-sex marriage will weaken or undermine the institution. But in my view, on the contrary, I think the fact that gay and lesbian couples want to get married doesn't undermine marriage, it actually strengthens it. Particularly at a time when so many heterosexual people are not getting married. You know, they're deserting marriage, they're cohabiting instead. But gay and lesbian people, many, want to get married. And that surely makes the institution stronger. And I think anybody who believes in love and marriage should welcome the fact that same-sex couples share that commitment to love and marriage and should be able to be part of it. The other principle, I think, which is very important, is that in a democratic society, we should all be equal before the law. You know, as many of you will know, I've passionately argued against discrimination concerning people of faith. I've defended Christians in this country and other countries who've suffered discrimination. I've defended the right to hold their faith without discrimination. And I would simply like Christian people and people of other faiths and no faith to reciprocate, to acknowledge the principle that we should all be equal under the law. Same rights, same responsibilities. And I'd say that even if people disagree with same-sex marriage, even if they personally think it's wrong, they should not seek to impose their views on everyone else through the law of the land. You know, Christianity and any faith, it's a choice. You know, before God, people have a right to think, consider, and make their own minds. There should be no compulsion in religion. It should be a free choice. God gives us that choice, if you believe in God. He gives us that choice, or she gives us that choice, and it's up to us to decide whether we take it. Discrimination is not a Christian value. Discrimination is against the Christian ethos of love and compassion and inclusion. I just finished by giving the example of my own mother. My own mother is a very devout Christian. She does take the biblical view that homosexuality is wrong, but she thinks it's a minor sin compared to all the awful, truly awful sins in the world today, among them racism and greed, discrimination against people because of their ethnic or religious views. These are the really major sins. Homosexuality is a very minor one in her view. But even though she does say that homosexuality is a sin and she thinks it's wrong, she also believes that discrimination against gay people is an even greater sin. That Christians should never, ever endorse any form of discrimination against another human being. She says that's against Christ's gospel of love and compassion. And so therefore, although she personally thinks homosexuality is wrong, she does believe that gay and lesbian people should have equal rights before the law, that they should be able to get married if they wish, that they should be protected against discrimination in employment, that they ought to not be criminalized or treated as second-class citizens. She believes that is the Christian gospel.
Thank you very much, Peter. Your turn, David.
Okay. I'm very grateful to Peter for being here, and I'm very grateful for his opening statement, and I'm sure we'll get on to discussing aspects of it. I completely agree that for me it's all about love as well, but it's how we define terms. So for me, the question of same-sex marriage boils down to what marriage actually is. So for example, in the nature of things, I love kids and I might desperately want to be a mother. I think I'd be a great mother. But I can't breastfeed and I don't have a womb, and let's say science managed to find some way to do that. No way. It's not in the nature of things. And I would argue that marriage is given to us, and as has traditionally been understood, that same-sex marriage is an oxymoron. It doesn't exist. Civil partnerships, yes, but marriage itself, it cannot do so. In fact, David Cameron said that when he was going to introduce same-sex marriage, he was going to redefine marriage. And that's exactly what happens. It's not that you've got two different types of marriage. It's that marriage has had to be redefined so that it can include same-sex couples. And that is my objection. It's not a question of discrimination or lack of equality. It's in the very question, what is marriage? I'll be interested to hear what Peter has to say, but I have asked politicians many times, can you please tell us what marriage is and how you would define marriage? And I have yet to come across a politician who's able to define marriage. They use the cute words. They say it's about love, two people who love one another, but once you start unpicking that, it all falls apart. I think my first objection would be that marriage cannot be redefined without destroying it. My second objection would simply be this: the government has no right to redefine marriage. I think marriage has been given to us by God, and the government does not have the right to do it. And that leads on to the third objection, which would simply be this: that once a government has taken to itself the right to redefine marriage to include two people of the same sex, then what is to stop the government redefining it again? I have yet to hear a good argument against polygamy, for example. There is also a case of a professor in Columbia who is requesting the right to marry his daughter. There is a case of two brothers who would wish to marry each other. Now, I know that people immediately get horrified and say, well, that's ridiculous, you're saying. But the argument from incredulity or things being ridiculous is not right. We're looking at it at a logical position. What is marriage? And my fear is that governments, having once redefined marriage, there's nothing to stop them redefining it again. I think my major concern, and one that maybe a lot of Christians don't get, and a lot of my non-Christian friends, a lot of my gay friends are horrified at, is my major concern actually is with the poor. I think that family breakdown and dysfunctional families have been a major cause of disharmony and disruption in our culture. I don't think that same-sex marriage is going to cause, is not going to cause the breakup of marriage completely, but I do think that it's another nail in the coffin. We've been going down this road for some time, and I think Peter is living he's an idealist, and I appreciate him for that. But I think he's living in a somewhat fantasy world if he thinks that marriage is going to be reinforced by same-sex marriage. I think it's going to be yet another nail in the coffin. And the people that will affect the most are the poor, and that really does bother me. And I guess my last concern is, and it's the most minor one, it's the one that the government thinks we in the church are most concerned about, is for religious and civil liberties. Now on this one, I think that Peter and I will probably agree, or I think almost totally, on this. But Peter is quite unique. He's remarkably consistent in this respect. But we've already seen instances in our culture of people being discriminated against because they hold a view of traditional marriage. One here that I know Peter knows about, the housing manager in Manchester who was deducted 40% of his pay for writing on his Facebook page that gay marriage was an equality too far. Now, to give Peter credit, he defended that man and thought it was ridiculous that he had lost pay on that basis. But it only takes 2 or 3 instances like that to make people feel very, very, very afraid. I can think of a social work student I know who was called in by one of his lecturers and told he would fail his course if he was expressed himself as being against same-sex marriage. So part of me is concerned that those who are activists for same-sex marriage have started to equate it with the race issue. And once they do that, and once that is accepted, then although there may be concessions just now, within a very short space of time, I think it will be illegal for people like me to publicly express a view against what they call equal marriage and what I think is not marriage at all. So there's a whole lot in there. I mean, we need to discuss the nature of marriage. This obviously is a Christian television station, and there'll be plenty of people who want to say, well, what does the Bible say about this? There's disagreements amongst professing Christians.
We'll take one thing at a time.
We've got all those as well.
So let's see how we go in the time we've got available. We've done reasonably well on the balance there, but the point about where is the barrier in terms of multiple relationships, or the age at which it should be acceptable to have a relationship, or why shouldn't, brothers, elderly sisters marry? Is there any boundary in your mind to what is appropriate?
Well, I think we need to compare like with like. At the moment, heterosexual people of a certain age are lawfully entitled to marry. And I think the argument predominantly is that the same rules and criterion should apply to same-sex marriage. But I'd like to perhaps start by picking up David and having a debate just about his first point, which is about the redefinition of marriage. I mean, all throughout the history of marriage, marriage has consistently evolved and been redefined many, many, many times. Back eons ago, of course, polygamy was the norm. Polygamy was the normal form of marriage, where one man took many wives. Also, of course, in the medieval period, the church sanctioned older men marrying girls of the ages of 12 and 13. That was an acceptable form of marriage, but we no longer accept child brides. So what I'm trying to say is that marriage has evolved. If you remember, initially, of course, marriage, when it was originally conceived, had nothing to do with love at all. It was all about property. It was about establishing male control over women and children, a system of patriarchy where the man was the head of the house and the man controlled the wife and children. And it was particularly evolved in order to ensure the inheritance of property through the male line from father to son. It was a way of ensuring paternity so that a man could be certain that, or as certain as possible, that this child was his and that this child should inherit his property. So it was devised as a system by the very rich to ensure their control of their property, the inheritance of property from father to son. So it's evolved now to mean much more about love, and that's good.
Evolution. But before you answer that, because Maria Miller said that bringing forward the implementation of the law that's passed this year to March was another step in the evolution of marriage. So before David answers about the historic evolution, how much further can it evolve? And that's really my question. Are there any boundaries to what is appropriate?
I think there's a general consensus that this is where it ends.
But she didn't say that. She said it's another step in the evolution of marriage.
No, she just meant that this is moving forward to implement same-sex marriage. The law was passed this year. It's now going to be implemented, and the first marriage will take place next year. That's all she meant.
Okay. David, answer.
Yeah, oh, sure. There's so many things in there. Actually, just on your very, very last point, when you say, I think there's a general consensus. Now, yes. But 6 or 7 years ago, there was a general consensus when civil partnerships were introduced that that would be it. You yourself have changed your mind about marriage because you have taken the patriarchal view of history and so on. So I'm afraid I've lived long enough to know that what is a general consensus now will change very, very quickly, especially when you have no absolute value. I am intrigued in history. I am a historian, and you'll forgive me saying this, but your view of history is a very, very, very simplistic, actually, view of history. Marriage wasn't just for the rich. Everything you've said is true in some contexts, at some times, in some cultures. But I think one of the dangers that you've got, and one of the dangers that people have, is that they, particularly in our culture, we've adopted this view that humanity started off in the swamp and we've basically been evolving and progressing. All our politicians want to call themselves progressive, which is a very interesting development and concept, because they think that humanity is just getting better all the time. I'm afraid I don't accept that view of history. I don't think it's empirically provable. And I think you'll find that, yes, not so much definitions. The definition of marriage has been pretty steady in terms of male and female, and for the purpose of bringing up children and so on. Variations of that, within that, have certainly changed. But I like reading, for example, the early church fathers, and a couple of months ago, maybe 3 months ago, I was reading one of them, and he refers to the fact that the Persians marry their mothers, and the Celts... No, sorry, it was the Persians marry their brothers, and the Celts, the Scots, marry their mothers. Now, this was 2nd, 3rd century. So, you know, it's not just quite the case that we've, gone from this way of marriage and there's been this progression and it's continued. I think that views of marriage have changed considerably.
To answer that, how do you answer David on that point?
Well, I think with a variation, he is reinforcing the view that ideas about marriage and what marriage is, the definition of marriage, has changed and evolved over the centuries. Yeah. And this is just another example of that change. And I think it is a change that is consistent with democratic humanitarian values to treat everyone equally. I think that, as I said, people who value love and marriage ought to be really welcoming the fact that gay people want to be part of this institution. And of course, there are many lesbian and gay people of faith in all religions who, for them, their faith and the validation of their love through marriage is tremendously emotionally and spiritually important. And for them to be denied that opportunity is really a negation of their faith as well as of their sexuality and identity.
It's interesting you've used the term sort of humanitarian values, and David used the term absolute values, but in one sense you see the humanitarian value of today as the absolute value, or do you think it can evolve further? So it's getting to the essence of this sort of values debate, because that's what will be of great interest to our viewers.
Well, one of the great documents that motivates my human rights work in all its different aspects is, of course, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which states very clearly that everyone shall have the right to marry and found a family. It doesn't say only heterosexual people, it says everyone. And I think that, to deny to adults...
Is that what it meant, though?
Sorry?
Is that what it meant?
Well, can I? Yes. Yeah, sorry, I'm coming here, and you can, and please feel free to have a go at me for this as well, because this may be. I've no doubt at all whatsoever that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, where it talks about people being married, is talking about men and women. But I wouldn't absolutize the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. in the same way as I wouldn't absolutize the United Nations and so on. I mean, when you've got an organization which at times will have on its Human Rights or Equalities Committee people like Mugabe, you know, I'm sorry, but I am deeply skeptical and cynical about our authorities and elites telling us what is right and what is wrong. I'm still want to come back to this, though, because you say things that they sound so good, and there'll be people who are listening in who totally support you and go, yeah, of course. I mean, it's all the right buzzwords. It's equality and love and so on, and a democratic right.
But these are not buzzwords for some effect. They're sincerely held, genuine, conscientious beliefs.
Yes, I realise that, but there are people who hold sincerely held, genuine beliefs. For example, I did a discussion on this up in Aberdeen in Scotland, and some of the young people there said, well, yes, we see no reason not to have polygamy. Why not, if people love one another? And already there's begun some movement towards that. So I think inevitably that is where this will lead, polyandry as well. But if you're talking about equality and the right to express love, what if there were two brothers who said, we want to express our love to each other, we want to be married? There is no logical reason, given the definition of marriage that the government has put forward, two people who love one another, there is no reason to exclude them from that. And just saying this is the general consensus just now, that's not sufficient. And I think you know that. In your, maybe, you know, there was an article, I think it may even be in the Telegraph, so I'm not sure you would have liked it, which said, you know, was asking, is Peter Tatchell becoming more conservative in his old age? Because you had before attacked the institution of marriage, and you had suggested that what we should have is some kind of civil compact that anyone, two friends, two sisters living together, anyone could have, you know, in terms of property rights and things like that. I mean, let me quote this to you, because I was stunned by this article, and I thought it was remarkably consistent, and I puzzled, and I really want to ask you this, because I've puzzled. Have you changed your mind, or in actual fact, are we really agreeing and you know that you're going to get what you want this way? So can I quote this?
Yeah, quote it and then I'll give you the chance.
Yeah, this is an article you wrote 10 years ago in The Independent. There were no calls for equality. Our demand was liberation. You're talking about the gay rights movement. We wanted to change society, not conform to it. Our radical, idealistic vision involved creating a new sexual democracy without homophobia and misogyny. Erotic shame and guilt would be banished, together with compulsory monogamy, gender roles, and the nuclear family. There would be sexual freedom and human rights for everyone. Gay and straight, our message was innovate, don't assimilate. And in that article, you were criticising those in the gay rights movement who were arguing for marriage. You accused them of being Blairite, conservative, conforming to heterosexual marriage, which, as you've indicated in your history, was patriarchal, and so on. Have you changed your mind?
Well, I think the first thing is that the argument around same-sex marriage does not revolve around my personal beliefs. Regardless of what I personally think about marriage, it's an issue of fundamental human rights and equality. It's about me acknowledging that people do love each other, happen to be of the same sex, and want to get married.
But did you
no, let me finish.
Yeah, yeah.
So even though I am personally critical of the institution of marriage, even though I personally would not want to get married, as a Democrat, I will defend absolutely the right of other people to make that choice if they wish. And quite clearly, the ban on same-sex marriage is homophobic discrimination. And as I said, to me, discrimination is not a Christian value.
But, you see, I'm still... When you wrote that article, did you still have that same opinion?
Yes, I've always taken the view, for 40 years, that marriage has a lot of patriarchal, sexist baggage with it. It has traditionally been a place of, imprisonment for women and children with male power enshrined, less so now than it was in the past. But that is not the issue. The issue is, should there be equality before the law? I have my own personal perspectives. As I said, I personally wouldn't want to get married, but as a Democrat, as someone who believes in democracy and equality before the law for everyone, I'll defend the right of Christians, gay people, whoever, to get married and have equal rights.
Well, can I ask then, if that is the case, as a Democrat, If I felt that I wanted to return to, let's say, a system that existed in the Middle East during the time of Abraham and wanted to have 4 wives, or if my wife wanted to have 5 husbands, or actually if I wanted to have 2 wives and 2 husbands, why democratically shouldn't I be allowed to do that? And why am I not allowed that level of equality?
Well, I think there are 2 issues here. One is about what is the public consensus. And today in Britain, according to all the polls, over 2/3 of the British people support the right of same-sex couples to have civil marriages in registry offices. Those same polls show that nearly two-thirds of religious people in Britain also support the right of same-sex couples to have a civil marriage in a registry office. And I'm certain that some of those religious people, like my mother, do not agree with homosexuality, but they believe that in a democratic society we should all be equal before the law. Now, when it comes to the wider, broader issue about equality in the realm of relationships, you raised the point about the article I wrote some years ago, arguing